muted us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, it's Paul Lothian. Larry Walter is across the street making a presentation on the balanced budget for the budget hearings this morning, so I'm going to pitch it. I apologize on the front end for that, but we'll try to work our way through the agenda if that's acceptable to everybody.
I guess it does make sense that
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, Debbie. It's Eric.
Good morning.
I was over there in special language meeting this morning, bright and early.
That was bright and early.
Oh, Melanie was awake.
Just barely, I think.
Yeah, that didn't go as bad as it could have this morning, so all in all, not a bad deal. Grant, are you going to run the screens and stuff?
yes, sir.
Okay. Was it 10 o'clock?
It is 10 o'clock.
Okay. Good morning, members of the State Board of Finance, guests, members of the press. I see that we have a quorum, and so I call this meeting to order of the State Board of Finance. The first order of business will be the adoption of the minutes of August the 11th meeting. If you would look at those, and if there's any changes, comments, or additions, deletions, please speak up. Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
Motion to adopt the minutes from Eric Munson.
I have a second.
I second it.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. The next item is the presentation of the Treasury Investment Performance Report by Treasurer Milligan. Treasurer Milligan, you are recognized for your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. Trust and hope that everyone's doing well and staying safe. Again, as we look at the first quarter for fiscal 2021, before I get into the details, I'd like to give you an overview of what our portfolio looks like now. This pie chart on your screen and in your packet represents the first quarter of fiscal 2021. And in the following slide, there's a little more description of the types of securities in each category. You'll see that we have a very diverse portfolio. As I reported to you in the last meeting, FY21 is going to be a difficult year, none to say the least, for the state treasury. The first quarter proved that to be true. Total revenue receipted between July 1 and September 30 was $6.83 million. That includes $1 million from our short-term portfolio and $5.75 million from our long-term portfolio. While it was no doubt a tough quarter, I'm learning to celebrate the successes where I can. And I'd like to announce to you that we hit a milestone in our treasury receipts. As of September 30th, my administration is proud to have earned the state and the hardworking taxpayers of Arkansas $400 million since taking office. That's right, $400 million in returns for our great state. So obviously I'm pleased to share this news with you. When I first came into office, I pledged to make Arkansas's tax dollars work much harder, and we are certainly doing that. We're doing the best we can with the money we've been entrusted, and I'm very proud of this accomplishment. We've also earned $58 million for state agencies like the Workers' Compensation Commission, our State Employee Benefits Division, and many others. Additionally, back in November of 2019, I directed my investment department to begin a program I call Invest Arkansas. This program is where our state treasury buys the municipal bonds of state universities, school districts, cities, and counties. I'm proud to announce that 1 year later, Invest Arkansas has secured more than $50 million in Arkansas bonds, We're investing in Arkansas again and again, making Arkansas's tax dollars work smarter. Like many families in our state, we're taking the opportunity to refinance their home mortgages. Entities within Arkansas are using this opportunity to refinance their public debt to get better rates and reduce their payments. Through Invest Arkansas, we're keeping money in Arkansas and earning better yields at a time when interest rates are at 0%. Finally, to continue the improved internal checks and balances within my office, I've hired an investment accountant to act similar to an internal auditor within our investment department. When you're the keeper of $4 to $5 billion of taxpayer money, any safeguards that we can establish that will add an extra set of eyes on that money is critical. And I'd like to take a moment here to welcome Stephen Kilgore, who is our Director of Investment Accounting. And with that, Stephen, if you'd like to say hello to our board, please feel free.
I'm glad to see all you all and glad to be here with the Treasurer's Office. And I've had many years at the Insurance Department and glad to be over here. It's a great environment as well.
Stephen, thank you very much. And again, we look for his continued service to the state of Arkansas. I can't say enough about how much he was recommended, came very, very highly recommended. And certainly his actions have proven louder than words. Since the appearance of COVID in March, the markets have been volatile at best. Interest rates have been at 0 and could stay there for years to come. I realize you're all aware of how the market works, but for those who may be viewing this meeting online, I wanted to give a brief explanation of what we're dealing with here in the Treasury. I've received several questions from people about why it seems the Treasury's portfolio is not rebounding as quickly as the stock market. For example, someone with 401k plans appear to be, and the answer is quite simple. Most 401k plans are made up of both stocks and bonds. And as you know, the younger someone is, typically the higher percentage they have of higher risk investment types like equities or commodities. Your Treasury, on the other hand, is limited to just bonds and specifically fixed income securities, which, while more stable and less risky, do produce lower yields. So our rebound, if you will, is going to be slower and look more like someone's 401k account who is nearing retirement, with investments in CDs, municipal bonds, and other more secure assets. Having said that, I wanted to offer you some insight into past economic recoveries and what they've looked like. The first chart shows what the recovery from the Great Recession of 2008 looked like. As you can see, the most economists, agree it's a U-shape or an elongated recovery. While we're starting to see some recovery activity in the economy since COVID, indicating a V-shaped recovery, we're cautious about predicting that is what's to come, given the continuousness, if that's pronounce that word, of COVID and the uncertainty with the recent presidential election. Now, the following chart gives a historical view of economic recoveries dating back to 1949. I'm pointing this out because I want to be very transparent with you, not only about the state of the economy, but also what we're doing to address these challenges. So, what is your state treasury doing to ensure we get the most return on our investments as possible? I've said it before. We're actively managing the investment portfolio. We're evaluating the fixed income market daily, taking advantage of any kind and every opportunity we find to reduce maturity duration, increase interest income on our holdings, and put money back into the coffers of the state. Much like everyone else, we're putting one foot in front of the other in order to get through this time of uncertainty in our lives. We're all experiencing COVID fatigue, both in our professional lives and our personal lives. But we have to keep moving forward, and we will, and celebrating our successes until better times come. Let's all stay safe, diligent, and keep taking the necessary steps in order to protect ourselves from COVID-19. The financial markets will recover. The fixed income market will recover, although it may be at a slower pace than the stock market. But we will get through this one day at a time. And in the meantime, let's appreciate what we can as we strive to make Arkansans' tax dollars work harder and smarter for them. Thank you, and certainly available for any questions.
Thank you, Treasurer Milligan. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I need a motion to accept the report.
Motion.
Second, please.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Our next order of business is the quarterly motions that we make each quarter to address business process issues that were enacted back in Act 1088. So these motions were also distributed out to you in email. As chairman of the State Board of Finance, I make a motion to the board that no funds are available for deposit into the State Board of Finance Certificate of Deposit Program. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. As the second, next motion, as the chairman of the State Board of Finance, I make a motion. The board direct the Treasurer of State to purchase warrants from the succeeding quarter, January 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2021, pursuant to Act 1088 of 2013, and to keep reasonable amounts in demand deposit accounts and money markets during the next quarter for the transaction of day-to-day business activities for the state. I need a second to my motion.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The next item of business is an update from the ULR investment team. They've been working with us, I guess, for a little over a year now on various projects. I'd like to recognize Dr. Andy Taylor, Dr. Andy Terry, and Dr. Viehbacher.
Good morning, Paul and Treasurer Milligan, and State Board of Finance. Thank you for having us again. What I'm going to do, if possible, is share my screen. So I guess my first question is, can everybody, is the writing big enough? Do I need to make the font bigger?
We can't see your screen, or I can't. There we go. Okay.
Is that big enough? I can make it a little bit bigger.
Looks good.
Okay. So what we'd like to do today is this is really kind of an update. First of all, I want to say, and I think Dr. Viehbacher would agree with me, that in our years of consulting, we've seen a lot of consulting reports go on shelves and stay there. And so, frankly, it's sort of encouraging to both of us, or very rewarding to both of us, that our last project didn't go that direction. In fact, the Treasury took it to heart and are doing everything they can to implement the recommendations. Sort of the downside to that is we're going to be really careful about what we recommend going forward, because we may get asked to help do it. So, but at any rate, so what I've tried to do here, that report, which all of you received and looked through, had several recommendations. And rather than list all of those, what I tried to do is from a 30,000 foot level, sort of give the big picture of what, the major areas that those recommendations aimed at, and then where the project that we're involved in that Paul just mentioned, what that project's attempting to complete, and then finally, what the status of this is. So in no particular order, one set of recommendations pertain to portfolio management. And the Treasury has actually already, for the most part, completed our recommendations. So for example, we recommended that they create an investment committee, which they've done, and that committee meets routinely. We had recommendations concerning staffing, and that staffing involved two areas. One was the accounting segregation. So hiring Stephen Kilgore is, from my viewpoint, is a great hire. I've known Stephen for a while. He taught at UALR for us, and great guy. So y'all really did a good job in my viewpoint with that hire. The investment expertise at the time we wrote the report was we felt that you were understaffed, and you had mostly, I think, satisfied, except with the passing of Martin, which I think set you back a little bit. So I think you're probably in the process of bringing that to where you want it to be. Software analysis understanding is you've accomplished that. One of the things I think that's still in process, we've recommended an investment manual. And I know Martin was heavily involved in that process because he and I had several conversations. And so, we don't know at what stage that particular recommendation is. We also had recommended a compliance position, with the relevant duties. And we know Autumn was promoted or moved into that position. And we say mostly complete because we know that she was either has or is undergoing training to help, I think, feel more comfortable in that role. So that's the portfolio management piece. The pieces that relate to the project that we're involved in, it involved three things. And so, and this ties back to what Treasurer Milligan was discussing, and that is that, when you can only invest in fixed income securities, the only way to earn higher rates of return, at least with an upward sloping yield curve, which is the norm, is to either lengthen your maturities or be willing to take more credit risk. I mean, those are really your two options. I mean, you can also take sort of optionality risk with mortgage backs, but ignoring that, you've got to lengthen maturities or take more credit risk. And so what we recommended is that the Treasury create a set of target or strategic asset allocations. And we recommended a bucket approach, and we recommended 3 buckets. And so very simply, a liquidity bucket, long-term bucket, and then the bucket that's in the middle, which is a buffer, okay? And so once you've determined, a target asset allocation, then it becomes easier to do a couple things, which one involves measuring performance. And so historically, performance has been measured relative to a target rate of return, which was set at the beginning of the year, but it was set historically in sort of an ad hoc basis, I guess. With target buckets, you can actually create a target rate of return that is sort of based in, I think a more reasonable or logical expectation. So the first thing that we had to do, or the first part of our report, is analyzing cash flows and liability balances of the Treasury to try to figure out how much can they invest long-term. And we received lots of help from Debbie Rogers and DFA in providing accounting information, and have waded way over our heads into that information. But at any rate, our approach was to look at the liabilities kind of like a bank does deposits, and try to figure out, what fraction of these deposits are what a bank would call core deposits. And so we use the term persistent or core to describe the liabilities that tend to stick around, because that's the money that Treasury could, in theory, invest longer term. Liabilities that we see coming and going, within the span of a fiscal year, or maybe within the span of, a few quarters, we treat it as temporary or not core deposits. And so that was the process for trying to figure out what's long-term. Then we looked at the liquidity piece, and Treasury already has a really good cash model. I mean, they have a good handle on what happens in a very short-term situation. So our approach there was to say, what's the maximum liquidity that Treasury needs to handle its very short-term obligations without having to liquidate something prior to maturity. And so once we determine liquidity, which, and you can see on the screen, we have percentages here. So these are our initial recommendations. These are all subject to discussion with the investment team, because we certainly want their feedback. At any rate, liquidity recommendations 11%, our long-term was 60, and that leaves a buffer of 29. And so then the next issue becomes, all right, we have these three buckets. What's an appropriate benchmark? What should these buckets invest in? And given what they invest in, what's an appropriate benchmark? So just as a real simple example, the liquidity bucket, you could liken that to maybe a portfolio that consisted of bank deposits and a money market account. I mean, just to make this really simple. And in fact, I should say our approach in this performance evaluation and these benchmarks is simple is better than complicated, because you can create some really complicated benchmarks, and you can do some really complicated performance analysis and attribution measurement. But we aren't convinced that that's going to help Treasury get where it wants to be. I mean, they want a better way to measure performance. They want a better way to lengthen maturities. But we think it also should be simple and understandable to most people. So once you've outlined these three buckets, then, as I said, the next step is to say what benchmark makes the most sense. Our preference would be to find a benchmark that the Treasury could actually invest in if it wanted to. So a money market fund that if they wanted to say, we're going to quit buying commercial paper and we're going to quit, investing on our own, we're simply going to put the money in a money market, that's a benchmark of what we call an investable benchmark. Similarly for the buffer, if the buffer consists of 1 to 3 year maturity, government agency, and corporate, then is there an index fund or ETF that has that same investment objective, that if Treasury wanted to go that route, they could do it. Again, we're not suggesting they should go that route. We're simply saying to us, that's the investable benchmark. That's what we can measure their performance against in a reasonable way. So we've actually, we've come with what we think are some good benchmarks, but this is completely dependent on our conversations with the investment team, which we're going to have next week. And, they have to buy in, okay, because this involves measuring performance. And, it's not fair if we measure performance using a benchmark that they don't agree, represents what they're trying to do. So they need, the buy-in really needs to be 100% from the Treasury team, and that's why we want their feedback, and are going to work to, before we finish this process, to make sure that they agree that this is a reasonable way to measure what we're trying to do. Okay. Dr. Viehbacher, feel free to chime in, and anybody, if you have questions, I don't want to preach or lecture. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. The other piece of this then is to create a template, if you will, for not only measuring, but breaking performance down or explaining why they either over or underperformed a benchmark. So a couple of comments related to this. One is, and we tried to highlight this in the report, we strongly feel that the State Board of Finance should not focus on quarterly results. Okay, from our viewpoint, performance measurement is a longer term process. We're not saying you shouldn't calculate performance on a quarterly basis. We think that quarterly measurement of performance is good. We don't think it needs to be more frequent than that. I mean, whether they can choose to do it more frequent, we don't think it's necessary. But in terms of how you view this and weight this, this is a longer term process. And what happens in any quarter from our viewpoint isn't really relevant. It's longer term. It's what does the trend look like, and how are they performing over the longer term. And so we want to be real clear about, this is not an effort or attempt to get into, overly analyzing how Treasury is investing on a quarterly basis, because I think that's the wrong direction. But what our template does do is it allows, once Treasury or once the investment team agrees, this is a fair benchmark, and we agree with this strategic asset allocation, it lets us then say, okay, if they outperform the market, why did they do it? Well, they outperformed because they invested longer term than the target, and longer term rates were higher. Well, they underperformed because they did exactly the opposite, because they chose to put less money in the long-term bucket than the strategic plan, than the strategic or target allocation, and longer-term rates were higher, and so they missed out on that opportunity, and that's why they underperformed. Or maybe they kept their target asset allocations exactly in line with the buckets, but they actually outperformed. They did a better job picking the investments than the benchmark, and so they outperform that way. And so our template will enable us, or enable Treasury and the State Board to figure out, or to explain what the performance is and why they did better or worse than the benchmark. And again, the other piece of this is it also lets you create a target return by simply substituting, what you expect the return on those benchmarks to be going forward versus what they actually were. So the last two pieces of this, and again, I know y'all don't want to be here all morning. Revised reporting to the State Board of Finance. So this is just saying, okay, we'll update the reports that are the information you already have to include what are the target asset allocations versus, so for example, Treasurer Milligan showed the pie chart, that would represent the actual allocations. And then we would say, okay, now let's compare that to what the target is. And then also I've already mentioned the performance measurement. So adding that template and explanation. The very last piece of this whole process is going back, once there's agreement between us, or really between the Treasury and the State Board of Finance, as to what these targets are and benchmarks are, is going back to the investment policy statement, which is really the guide for the investment team, and updating it to include the strategic asset allocation, the performance benchmarks, and then to change any allowable assets, if that needs to be done. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of where we are. We are mostly finished with this whole process. What remains, as I alluded to earlier, is we want to sit down with part of the investment team next week and get their buy-in and their agreement that, this makes sense. And also, obviously let people review the draft and make sure that we haven't made some kind of, error, mistake or omission, that we overlooked something or we didn't understand something correctly. So we'll also vet the report, among the rest of Treasury to make sure, as I said, that we didn't make a mistake. So at that point, I'll get open to questions, I guess. Or it's Dr. Bebop.
Let me add a couple of items here. In terms of strategic asset allocation, represents the percentage allocation under what you would consider as a normal market environment. And so what the investment team would do is deviate from that based on what Mr. Milligan was earlier talking about, is constantly looking at the market and any short-term changes in market environment, you want to take advantage of it. So the technical allocation deviate from strategic allocation. And so when you look at the final report, in the final report, we will provide ranges which allocation may vary the result of market environment and how the team can look at the market environment and create tactical allocation. So yeah, I just wanted to add that one.
Okay, thank you for the report. Do we have any questions, comments?
You are just like an early morning finance class.
I've got one question, and it may be premature to ask this, but in your report and working with the treasurer's office and going through the various stages that you're going to go through, do you see any need for any legislative changes in the law that would make things better for us or more efficient for us in trying to implement your suggestion?
So I don't know if that's to me or Dr. So I'm not an attorney, so I'm very hesitant to start talking about what has to be legislated. The only thing that comes to mind, Paul, I do vaguely remember that I think there were some issues with being able to do repurchase agreements. I think, you know, that's an investment opportunity that I think Treasury is precluded from doing right now because of some legal issue so that's the only area that I'm aware of, at least at this point, but I'm not saying there aren't others. That's what I'm aware of.
Okay.
Well, what I would say, Paul, is that the repurchase agreement are a significant source of investment, particularly for shorter term. And so by not having that available, we're significantly reducing our investment opportunities.
And I'm assuming the risk there is not any greater than risk we're taking with other investments.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll get back to you. I just, you know, we get an opportunity every 2 years to look at what the law says and then what our regulations and availability of investing are. And in the current environment, if we need something, if there's a restriction there that's obvious, then I think we certainly need to bring that to Mr. Walther and Treasurer Milligan's attention and eventually try to decide what to do with that limitation so that we can address that in the session if the decision is such to do that. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay. If not,
I'll stop sharing my screen. I can figure out how. There we go.
with that, I request that we have a motion to accept the report. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you so much. Everyone in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The next item of business is the Rules Committee report, and I recognize TJ Fowler for that report.
Morning, Paul. Thank you. Members of the board, thanks for having me. Hope everyone is doing well in these strange times. As y'all probably remember, we have 2 outstanding rule changes. The first rule change was the one that y'all proposed and voted to accept in the December 2019 meeting. That rule change primarily made changes to the security and broker selections, and it was in response to some legislation that had passed in the previous session. That rule change is going to subcommittee next week on the 16th. Assuming it passes the Rules and Regs Subcommittee, it would go to the full ALC shortly thereafter. And I would presume that it would be officially promulgated within the next 30 days or so. That rule took a little bit longer due to some delays that were outside of our control or DFNA's control due to COVID in those early months of the coronavirus. The second rule change was the one that y'all voted for in the August meeting. That change primarily altered the permissible corporate debt ratings. We've sent all that documentation in, the APA process has begun, but we're still in the early phases of that. And I'll report back. I should know better where it is at the next meeting. Does anyone have any questions on that? Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for your report. The next report is from the Chief Compliance Officer, Autumn Sansom. You're recognized to give your report.
Thank you. Over the last quarter, I've continued to have conversations with employees in the office and their roles. As I mentioned in the past, the implementation of Clearwater plus the different schedules due to COVID has really slowed progress. I hope that in the coming months, we can work together to complete some of the division's roles for the operations manual. I will mention that, and I know that, well, I will mention the Treasury wants to continue to work on Martin's vision for the office, which will provide additional firewalls and efficiency. I've attended a few of those meetings and feel that the Treasury is making every attempt to improve the flow of the office as well as mitigate risk. It's also worth mentioning, and I know that we've mentioned this in the meeting already, that the Treasury has hired an accountant that will help with all the investment entries. This is another step that Treasury is taking to segregate duties among the divisions, which then alleviates the risk of mistakes. This is my compliance update, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Okay. Seeing no questions, I need a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Is there any other business to come before the board? Okay, seeing none, I'll note that the next meeting will be February the 9th, 2021. I assume at 10 o'clock that morning. With that, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second. Second.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day. Be safe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Eric, it was nice to see you.
Hey, Dr. Viehbacher, yes.
Been a long time.
Bet we need to get together. It's COVID. Let's reach out to me, or I'll reach out to you. Let's try to visit.
All right. So,
Thank you.
take care.